Okay, we're doing Tafshin Aleph Halacha Yud. Salam Shamochem Behembasa, baskets that you salt the meat in. Yesh Matzrichim Magalan. So those who hold that you have to kasher them before Pesach, meaning you want to use them to salt meat in them for Pesach. So you have to be choshish that there was bread, crumbs of bread got into the salt. Because until now you're just putting meat and chicken into this with salt. What's chametzik about it? Right. But you have to be choishish that maybe there was some crumbs mixed into the salt, and the basket was baleh. The yesh mishachot, and there are those who hold that you don't have to. We'll explain more in a second. The near and dvarv, and the Mechaber says that halacha is that you could be mekel. But the Ramah says the toy lahagila. It's better to kasher them, or at least chadashim, or to buy new ones. And if you can't kasher them, you should buy new ones. Okay, so we're gonna two things to talk about in this din, and we're going to talk about a third, we'll expand into a third one also. Okay, the first thing is like this. This din about salting a basket that was used for salting, and then you're going to use it for salting of pastic and stuff, is really a din from Yardei. It not really a din from over here, which is to say in Yardei in Kuf Hay, particularly in Sifri Base, in Kuf Hay there's a din, it talks about whether Maliach is Kurisech, whether you get blias through salting something. And the din there is as follows. If something is usher and it's salty, it can force tam into something else. But if the thing that's kosher is the salty one, that doesn't draw tam out of the other food. So it has, in order for the tam to transfer, it has to be that the treif is the salty one. The fact that the kosher one is salty is of no significance. It could be enough, it doesn't make a difference. It all counts that the treif one should be. So if you have two things side by side, you have to see which one is the salty one. If the treif one is the salty one, or the chametzik one is the salty one, then the bli is transferred. An extension of that then is that salting something can never get tam out of a kli. Meaning, when you can put tam into a kli by let's say salting a piece of meat on a kli would make tam be absorbed into the kli. Tam of the blood would get absorbed into the kli. But salting a kosher piece of meat on a treif kli will never draw tam out. Okay? And it's sort of an extension of the first thing because the kli is not salty. Okay? So in order for the tam to transfer, the treif thing or the chametzik thing has to be the salty thing. Mm-hmm. And in the case of a kli, we look at the kli as being not salty. The kli is not salty. The kli is just a kli. So the tam, even if the food that's on there is salted, like in our case, you're going to salt kosher meat on it, you can't draw tam out of it like that. That's what the Mechaber says in Yardei. But the Ramah there says, you should be machmir, and you should not be samach on this for a kli. For a kli, you should be machmir and say that if you salt something on a tray for kli, the salt will draw tam out of it. Because there's a sheet that's showing that yes, salt can draw tam out of a kli also. Okay. So our Ramah who says to be machmir is sort of a copy of that Ramah over there that says to be machmir because in our case, let's say you salted the meat and there was chametz in the salt. So the kli would be changed, but who cares? It's not going to come out. Right. So Mikra Din, Mr. Brewer says, but the evidence is mutter because you can't get tam out of the kli. But l'chatchila, you say that the tam could come out of the kli through the salting also.
Okay. For sure, it's going to be in a ben yarmah then, right?
For sure, it's going to be in a ben yarmah. Well, maybe yes and maybe no. But for Pesach, that doesn't make a difference. If you make the food on Pesach, the din is a chametz on Pesach. Even if the tam is in a ben yarmah, it asks the food. Even if nursing time of is also on Pesach, according to the Ramah, so that food would become also. Right. So what you mean is that you don't think it's likely that I used breadcrumbs. If there was bread in my salt punked the day before Pesach, it could have been 2 months ago once there was breadcrumbs in it. So, but you're right, it would be, but by Pesach time it would already be Ein Ben Yomim. But the Ramah says that on Pesach,
nursing time was gone on Pesach.
On Pesach, meaning because like wood is mutter, but so the Ramah is talking about not these given
Pesach.
No, the Ramah is talking. The Ramah, all these things about kasher and kalim is assuming you're going to use them on Pesach.
You might use the kalim, but when are you going to kasher it?
Well, the shaila is: do you have to kasher or you don't? The Mechaber says you don't have to kasher it. I mean, you could use it without kashering it. You just use it as is. So he's talking about you're going to chef meat and salt it on Pesach. Right. So the Ramah says, well, for that, the bleeds are going to come out. You shouldn't do that. Right. But for the other, it would be much, even if it was on Pesach, because we say the salt can't get the tamach. Right. Okay. The Ramah in your day, in your day it's clear, but all the things I'm telling you is that the kli is treif. The salt will put the tam into the kli, just can't get it out. So if the kli is treif, it means you can't use this kli for. You can't use this kli for a hot product. It is treif. Just that the salt can't get the tam out. So therefore, for the way we're using it to resalt another food, that you're allowed to do. But the salt does put the food into the kli, and the kli becomes trim. Okay. The case that they're talking about in your idea is about using form molds for holding cheese. That the cheese would be salty, and that's still good. Okay. Now the second part, another thing that the Machaber is saying is this case that you have a basket that you use for salting. This case is talking about that you don't know that there was chametz in there. As far as you know, there was just meat and salt.
Right.
So another shiloh that's going on here is, should I be? And this is how Mishnah Baruch says it. Should I be choshish that there was meat, that there was bread in here? I don't see anything. All I know is I put meat and salt on here.
Right.
So the machmirim over here hold that even though the mekilim hold that you have no reason to think that there was breadcrumbs in the salt, so you don't have to be choshish. That's what the mekilim hold. And the Machaber, who's following that, is saying you don't have to be choshish for such a thing. And in fact, the Machaber is really telling you a rule. There's a rule that when the Machaber says something, he says 2 days, and he says the first day of plain, and then he says yesh imrim, then he means to pass like the first day.
Really?
But when he says yesh imrim, v'yesh imrim, then he means to pass like the second day.
Who says that klal?
This is the Bir Allah brings such a klal. That's a rule like that. So over here he says yesh matzrichen hagala, v'yesh mishachol. So he has a yesh imrim, and a yesh imrim means he means to pass like the second sheet. Well, here he even speaks it out. V'nir and dvar, that like the second sheet. So here he's speaking out that rule. But when he says yesh imrim and yesh imrim, he means to go with the second. When he says plain, the yesh imrim, that he really means to go with the first day. That's such a rule from the Bir Allah. Okay, so over here he's speaking that out, that you don't have to be choshish. You don't have to be choshish. Maybe there's such a thing. Maybe there's such a thing that the guy is that there's maybe some bread comes in. It's far-fetched. Okay, but now let's turn it around. The Ramah says you should be machmir. So not only is the Ramah saying you should be machmir that salt can draw tam out of a kli. That was the thing he said in your day. He's even saying it in this case where we don't even know that there was chametz here. It's even further chash, and we can only imagine that the Ramah is only saying this because it's Pesach. Okay, that for year round, you have to be choshish two things. First of all, that there's a shita that salt can take the time out, and second of all, you have to be choshish. There was chametz there in the first place. Why would you think that? I just put salt on there. Why would I think that they would put some breadcrumbs mixed into there? So it's the Ramah.
During the year, you would be choshish that there was treif over there.
Right, but why
there's no reason to assume that there was treif during the year. So right.
It would be. Imagine that kind of exercise. Why would you think that the salt had something mixed in that was treif? Why would you think that? What would be the reason for that?
Right.
So with this salt, I mean, unless you could tell me that maybe people dip their bread into the salt and then use the salt again. It's hard to imagine that there should be breadcrumbs in there. I mean, I guess not crazy, but it's completely chash coming out of no place. Okay, but I say that because the Ramah is saying to be machmir on two fronts, and probably it's because it's Pesach, so he's saying it's a special chumrah for Pesach. You can only imagine it's a special chumrah for Pesach. But there's another type of thing, another example, which I think is a drop difference, which is we're saying should you be choshish for something that maybe it happened, maybe there was chametz here. Okay, that's one type of chash. There's another thing called a milsa d'leiramulay. Since year round I'm allowed to eat chametz, I don't pay any attention to whether I use something for chametz. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I have a mug, and as far as I know, I use this mug only for coffee. So I say I could use it for Pesach because coffee is the coffee that I have is kosher for Pesach, so I could use it for Pesach. Mm-hmm. So for that, we would say that's not saying maybe choshish use it for chametz. We're saying it's d'leiramulay. In the middle of Sukkot, if you decide to have a hot cocoa in here, or you decide to stick some cake into your coffee, it's of no significance then. It doesn't mean anything to put chametz in it, so it doesn't register that you did that. No, it's not to say should we be choshish for a far thing. It's that during the year when you did those things, you weren't paying any attention. It didn't have any significance. I've told you the story, but I sit on the plane and I said to the guy, "Can I have 7-Up?" or something like that? And he says, "Well," I said, "Can I have Sprite?" And the guy says, "Sure." He pulls out of his thing a Sierra Mist, and he starts pouring it. I said again, "You have Sprite?" He says, "Yeah," and he's pouring it in. And it took me 3 times. So the guy said, "Oh, well, Sierra Mist is the same thing as Sprite." Because to him, when I said the word, "Can I have Sprite?"
Is that a problem with Sierra Mist?
No, it's kosher. No, I was just trying to see what was going to happen because in his mind the word Sprite meant lemon lime soda, and I'm giving you lemon lime soda. That's what I'm giving you.
Right.
So to him it's d'leiramulay. It doesn't have any significance which brand am I giving you. So he answered the question to him honestly. So the same thing for me. I use this cup of coffee. It doesn't. When I used it once then, it was no significance in the middle of the summer whether this was chametz. So it doesn't register by me. So I think that's different than the Ramah. The Ramah is saying to be machmir even where there's just stomach chash out of no place. Maybe there were breadcrumbs in here. But I'm saying there are times that the chashash is more significant, where it's just like regulated. I can't remember ever using this for chametz, but come on, I use my mug for all kinds of things, and it's of no significance, so it doesn't register, and that's even more reason to be machmir in that case. Okay. Now I want to then move, even though it's not really what's talked about over here. It's an extension of what was talked about, which is the dinim of.
So is that the point?
Yeah,
it's the bottom line.
The Ramah is saying
the only reason he's doing it is because it's Pesach.
No, but the Ramah's case is saying to be choshesh for something that was the choshesh for something which is just a far outside of zuki iser.
Right.
He's saying that's a special chumrah for Pesach.
Right.
The din of loy ramule, I'm not sure. That's more called that case. That case is easier for me to hear you'd be machmir on that, and even maybe for not for Pesach, it doesn't happen. Pesach is an example of something that year-round it's not usher, and all of a sudden it becomes usher. Right. So year-round it has no significance to me when I use something with chametz. Okay. So now the dinim of what's belay, how the blias happen through Kovush, is going to be a little bit about it later when it talks about how to kasha from Kovush, but it's really in tough Mem Zayin. It's not
a new thing you're saying.
Yeah. A different part of this din, which is about how blias happen through Kovush. So that's worth just going through. It's really in tough Mem Zayin, which we're not going to do. So it's worth it just to mention. Yeah. The mechaber here is the Shulchan Aruch is talking about that you did your salting of your meat just with salt, and that's why the din here has to do with whether the salt makes time go in or time go out. Mm-hmm. Okay, but that's because salt has its properties. But with the regular din of Kovush is when you did not with salt, but you did it with some kind of a liquid, and that causes time to be transferred in and out of kelim. Okay, so that's different a little bit. It's an extension, but a little bit different in this case. And in fact, there are cases of Kovush and salt. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, the first thing is Kovush only works. The rules of Kovush only work when there's a liquid. The Rosh says that the word liquid in this thing means that the thing is misnaneh, it pours. Okay, it moves when you move it around. So, for example, he says honey or oil are considered to be liquids. For this din, they're considered to be liquids. Something fat and honey in a clay, they would be Kovush. But if you use ice or use fat that had congealed, okay, that would not be, and even some say a thicker types of honey that are like really hard, that's not a liquid, it doesn't move. When you tip the thing of congealed fat, it doesn't move, it just sits there. It's like plop, it doesn't roll, it doesn't flow. That's not called a liquid for this kind of a thing. Okay. Second is that in order for Kovush to happen, in a typical Kovush, takes 24 hours, and those 24 hours have to be consecutive. If you took a cleat out if you left it for 10 hours today and 20 hours tomorrow, that would not be Kovush. It has to be 24 straight hours. Okay?
10 hours today.
10 hours today. They took it out and then put it back in for another 20 hours.
Right. Took it out for a minute.
For a minute. And then you put it for 20 hours tomorrow. That would not be Kovush because you didn't have 24 hours in a row.
There's also Linus Lila.
Okay. Linus Lila is a separate thing. I'm going to leave that on the side. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, Linus Lila has to do with Eid Binyamin. It's a different thing.
Oh, it's nothing to do with Kovush.
No.
So Kovush means 24 hours from the time you put it in.
24
hours. Nothing to do with the days.
Correct. Now, the next thing is that in order for Kovush to happen, there are two machlokes about how Kovush happens. About Kovush, one is, does the liquid have to stand perfectly still, or can it be moving around in the kli? I mean, let's say I have a truck, okay, and as the truck drives around, the stuff doesn't sit still; it shakes up around, or it's in a tank and it's being stirred. Okay, so it's not sitting perfectly still. So there are those who say that it has to sit perfectly still, so that the liquid could work right on that piece of the kli. Right. It could keep on like banging its way in for 24 hours straight. But it's accepted. Most people say that no, even if it's moving around the kli, as long as it's in the kli, that can create Kovush also. Mm-hmm. But now there's a second question, which is what happens if you have, let's say, a pipe, and through this pipe, liquid is flowing. So for 24 hours, there's liquid in the pipe, but it's not the same liquid at all. Mm-hmm. There are those who are machmir about that also. Okay, but here most say that are mekel about this thing. So what the rule comes out is it has to be the same liquid in a kli for 24 hours, uninterrupted, but that liquid could be moving around. So if the liquid is going through a pipe, that's not a problem because it's not the same liquid. But if it's swooshing around within the tank, then that is considered Kovush.
Yeah,
okay. Now we have a case which is an in between of all these cases, and it's very lamai.
One thing, and for the pipe, we're not kosher. There's drops always that are going to remain.
that'll sit in one spot for 24 hours.
Well,
Because the liquid is all pouring through.
Moving
You think,
forward.
what's that? Nah, it's not going to sit.
All right.
Okay, so now we have a case like this. And this is a very Lamaisa case. People who want to make Chol Yisrael milk in a not Chol Yisrael plant, what they'll sometimes do is they need to store their milk someplace.
Mm-hmm.
They bring in the milk, and in certain situations, it's got to sit for more than 24 hours. Well, they don't want to have to kasher the kelim.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do is like this: they have a tank, and after 20 hours, they take
the holding tank.
They have a tank,
Right.
the storage tank.
Storage tank. Okay.
They take after 20 hours, they take the milk out of the bottom, and they pump it through a pipe up to the top of the tank. So it pumps from the bottom straight up to the top and drips right back into the same tank. And their thinking is, well, I've taken it out of the tank. You only take it out for a minute. So I took it out. And now I took it out and put it right back in. And that's in fact what people do. There are many people who make milk like that, that's what they do. They say it's not covered. After 20 hours we pump it around and we drain all it out, all around it. We got rid of the coverage. And that's accepted. Rabbi Dolsky didn't like it because he says, you're playing a game over here. Who told you that the Kli is just the tall tank? I'll say the Kli is the tank with the pipe moving around into it. It's basically sitting in the same place for 24 hours. The pipe is part of the Kli also. It's like an extension of the tank.
The pipe was empty before.
You think right? So the pipe has no Kli because the pipe only had product in it for a few hours. But
no, if the pipe is part of the tank.
You mean then it would have been full the whole time?
Right.
You mean the fact that the pipe stays empty for 20 of those hours shows us that it's not really part of it, it's an outside part. Okay, that's a good explanation. Okay, that's a good explanation. But and in fact, that's what people do. It's pretty common that people do that rather than have to catch those tanks. They just draw the stuff out after 20 hours and then they say. And you're explaining that how could you look at it as the same Kli when so most of the time there's nothing in there.
Right.
It's not just like an extension.
And if you fill it up and overfill it, it won't go
into the air. Right. It has no connection. Right. It has to be pumped into it. Okay, fine. That's good. Fine. I'll accept that. Okay. Okay. Now what we said about 24 hours is for regular Kovush. Now what happens if you have the Mechaber talks about in your day? If you have seer, which is fish brine, which is understood to mean something that's very, very salty liquid. Mm-hmm. There, the din is that Kovush happens not in 24 hours. Kovush happens in a shear called Kadesh Yaman al Esh V'Yarsiach. The amount of time it takes to cook up a pot of water. Okay, I don't know how big the pot is. The person can say it's between 6 and 18 minutes. Different shiurim how much it is. A couple of minutes. Okay, within a couple of minutes, the Kovush happens. So if I put,
I understand what you're saying.
If I have pickles in a brine, in a thick brine, in a treif Kli, those pickles will draw out, will put tam into the Kli, and we'll also draw it out. No, not davar charif. No. It has seer in it, which is a salty brine. Causes Kovush to happen in a couple of minutes. The Kovush happens in a couple of minutes. Okay. And the Mechaber talks about that. No. Seer. The Mechaber talks about that it could put the tam into the Kli, and the Achronim say most say that even to take the Kli out of the Kli also could be done in a couple of minutes. Okay, it works in both directions in a couple of minutes. That's how most hold that it goes both directions in a couple of minutes. This is very negela, as we said before in cheese companies. One of the things you do to cheese is you brine it. After you make it into its form, it sits in brine for a long time. So if you make kosher cheese in a treif plant, or whole Yisrael cheese in a treif plant, then the brining, it Kovush will take 24 hours, so you let it brine for less than 24 hours. Or you take it out of the thing and you dump it back in again. But being as Kovush of seer happens in a couple of minutes, then you're going to have to kasher the brine tank, which is a nightmare. So some people instead will just line the brine tank. Instead of, they say the brine tank will stay safe, and I'll put in some kind of a liner to protect bleeds from coming in. But this case of seer is very lamaisa for those kind of cheese plants, because the Kovush happens in a couple of minutes, and obviously too short for brine. Okay. Now the Mechaber says.
Practically speaking, what do they do?
So they kasher the brine tank, or they line it. They'll put something into it.
Do actually line it?
Yeah, or they have to kasher it. The Kovush happens in a couple of minutes.
How big is this thing?
They're very big tanks. So either they have
what would you line it with?
Not a clue. I don't know what they. There must be things that are made for it.
Okay.
So now, the Mechaber says not only is the din that I just said to you by seer, it's also by davar charif. that same din that Kovush happens in a couple of minutes also applies to double charf also. According to the Mechaber, if I would put vinegar into a kli, which this is very common, when you take vinegar, you produce it wherever you do, and then you use a filling line. Vinegar companies almost every one of them does wine vinegar and kosher vinegar. Now the filling, sometimes it's hot. They like to pasteurize vinegar to get out the cloudiness of it, but it doesn't have to be. So some places won't have any heat in the filling. So you say, okay, my filling line has no problem. I can use it for cold and hot. I can use it for kosher and treif because there's no problem. It's not going to be covered in the filling line. It doesn't sit there for 24 hours. But according to the Mechaber, that coverage of double charf happens in also in a couple of minutes. Well, then of course it could happen. You don't think the liquid will sit in the holding tank?
Who says otherwise?
Right, we didn't get there yet. So according to the Mechaber, there would be coverage for double charf also in a couple of minutes, which would mean I can't use the same line for both because it'll just sit there. It's going to sit there for a couple of minutes. Potentially that's going to happen. But the Shach says it's not true. The Shach says that coverage of vinegar is like anything else. It takes 24 hours. There's no quick coverage. The only quick coverage is the
coverage of vinegar or double charf?
Double charf. It's a double charf. The Mechaber says, but see, everyone agrees that by seer there's quick coverage. The Mechaber says, and also by charf there's also a quick coverage. And the Shach says, no, it's not true. By charf there's no quick coverage.
What's the difference in Matthias between seer and, is it the same reason? What's the reason behind seer that it's a few minutes?
So I would guess you know that
because of double charf.
No, because salt has a property of extracting things. You use like for salty meat. So somehow that makes it time go in and out faster. I don't know where this comes from. I'm saying it would make the time go in and out faster. Charf is just a sharp tasting food. We wouldn't say that makes it go in and out faster.
And salt is not double charf?
Salty water?
Yes.
I have no idea. You think maybe salty water is also double charf?
Right.
That I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it might be. But that's not what the Mechaber says.
Seer.
That you're saying is the Mechaber might understand that seer is because of the harifus of the seer, and charf is a different extension. Maybe I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But the Shach says it's not true. It's only seer. It's especially my seer. It has nothing to do with double charf. Now, there's a sort of a sphere in the Beis Yosef about which way he holds. Even though I just told you the Shulchan Aruch says that there is coverage, there's a sphere from the Beis Yosef that sounds like coverage of charf takes 24 hours. So the Magen Avram in Taf Mem Zayin, that's what we're not getting to. The Magen Avram says the answer to the stira between the two shittas in the Beis Yosef is when it's a strong double charf, then coverage happens quickly, and when it's a not so strong double charf, then coverage happens in the regular 24 hours. That's how the Magen Avram wants to answer. And what's significant about that is that the Mishnah Berurah brings the shita, and he says to be makel 24 hours even on the Magen Avram's strong double charf. So here the Magen Avram wanted to answer the kasha by saying it doesn't work by light double charf, but by strong double charf it does work. On that, the Mishnah Berurah says you don't have to be machmir for that. Okay. Why? Because like the Shach says this rule of quick coverage doesn't apply to double charf. And many people follow this. This is a reasonably accepted to follow like the Shach, because the Mishnah Berurah says so, that there is no double charf does not make fast kfisha. Double charf takes 24 hours just like everything else.
Right. And the cheese place was the seer.
Right, the cheese place was using seer. Right. Everyone agrees that there's quick coverage. But by charf, there's good basis, and many accept that there is no coverage until there's 24 hours. Okay? Now, before I still haven't answered you the question about why some people confuse this. I'm going to get to it in a second. This is what I'm about to say is a theory. What does the Magen Avram mean that strong vinegar and light vinegar, one's a strong charf and one's a light charf? So this is a personal theory. If you would have known this before you went to the vinegar plant, you would have appreciated more. When you make vinegar, the acetobacter work on the alcohol, and they turn the alcohol into vinegar, the alcohol into acetic acid. Okay. And what they do is they function to make vinegar, which is they call 120 grains, 12% acetic acid and 88% other things. And at that point, the acetobacter plots. Okay, it can't function after it gets to that so much acidity. It can't function in the plots. It can't work anymore. Table vinegar that you use in your house is 5% acetic acid, or 50 grains. Okay, when you in your house, what they do is they take this 12% and they water it down to 5% before they sell it to you. So now my theory is that when the Magen Avraham says strong vinegar is the real double charav that the Mechaber is masking for, and the light vinegar is the one that you don't have to be choshesh for. He means his strong means the 12%, the way it comes out of the fermenter. When you make it, it comes out of 12% strength. That's strong vinegar.
And what is it used for? Industrial?
Nobody uses it. No, nobody uses it as.
120 grain. They sell 120.
They sell. You're right. People use it. I shouldn't say nobody. People use it industrially because they sell. If I need to put vinegar into my ketchup,
they're having less diluted.
I put less into it, or I use it for. It's easier to transport the stronger vinegar, and I dilute it. I'm saying this, but when the issue of it is when you make vinegar, if you make vinegar in your house, it would come out straight, very strong. Then you dilute it down for table use. That's the weaker vinegar, and we in fact do that. It comes out of 12%, and we dilute it down to 5%. I don't know what the Magen Avraham did, but he probably did something very similar. That came out about 12%, and he diluted it down to like our 5%.
Right.
Okay, that's just okay. Now, however, now we come to the part that confuses people. Okay, as follows: Kovush, in a normal case, takes 24 hours. So the Taz points out a rule: if Kovush takes 24 hours. By the time the blia gets out of the kli, it'll be ein ben yomai. When I put the tam into the kli, at the end of the 24 hours, the tam gets in, and it's a good tam. Now I put the kosher food into there. By the time the tam comes out, it's going to be ein ben yomai. So it'll always be mutter b'yed. But there's now another rule: a double choruf that absorbs a tam that's ein ben yomai makes that tam be l'shvach. It's machai l'shvach. It takes an ein ben yomai tam and makes it to be as if not an ein ben yomai tam. That rule, that double choruf, has absolutely nothing to do with the shach and mechaber I told you beforehand. The shach holds double choruf doesn't have quick klisha, but he agrees that double choruf can be mechayil l'shvach. So if I do kovush of vinegar it's not that vinegar is not choruf. Vinegar is choruf. But we hold like the shach that even though it's choruf, it still doesn't make a quick klisha. But if I do klisha of 24 hours on my vinegar, it's not going to be mutter b'diavad because it is a double choruf. So if I did kovush for 24 hours of water in a kli, or I did apple juice in a kli, the apple juice will be mutter b'diavad. If I did kovush of double choruf for 24 hours, when the 24 hours are over, the double choruf is going to be usher b'diavad. Because we're not saying that vinegar isn't choruf. No, vinegar is choruf, but choruf doesn't have fierce klisha. So when that choruf sits there for 24 hours, it doesn't have fierce klisha. But when it does finally get to its kovush, it's mechayil l'shvach, and it'll make the food even usher b'diavad. Okay, that's the confusing point that people find that confusing. The first din that we say that klisha doesn't happen quickly is not because vinegar isn't choruf. No, vinegar is choruf. Just that choruf doesn't make it have a fierce klisha. But choruf has another din that's mechayil l'shvach. When the 24 hours end, it's mechayil l'shvach, and it makes the time to be l'shvach. Okay. Now there's one other set of din which we're not doing now, which is when you do kovush, how deeply does that help the tam penetrate? Does it go deep into the kli? Does it go above the waterline? That we'll do later when we get to the other din about how you kashrus. We'll get to that part. That's a whole other part of kovush. Okay.